Hello, friendos. I'm Brian King. This is the Brian King Show. That's what I'm calling it until I can think of a better name or get one suggested to me. So this is my first attempt at a podcast, and it's something I've wanted to do for quite a while. So I'm kind of break down exactly what it is that I'm going to be discussing, and basically just kind of shoot the breeze, stream of consciousness for the next, I would like to go maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes if I can. Again, I have no idea what I'm doing, and this is my first attempt. So I'm looking for any and all feedback. Tell me what you'd like to hear, what you enjoy hearing from this brief sample, and what you'd like to basically have discussed on the show in the future for your listening pleasure. So I'm going to start off here with just basically an intro and discussing the structure of like how I'd like to see the podcast kind of round out. Basically, I'm going to talk about things that I enjoy and know at least a rudimentary amount of stuff about, so I don't come across like a complete rube. But it's something I've wanted to do, like I said, for a couple of years, and finally have this Blue Yeti mic in front of me, and it's all hooked up, and I'm learning a little bit about audio engineering and editing. I wouldn't say engineering. I don't want to make myself sound like I actually and doing anything here other than talking into a mic and recording it. But yeah, so this is something that I hope could be at least fun for the 3 to 5 people that will listen to it. But I guess it's my coffee. Which reminds me, this episode of The Brian King Show is brought to you by Black Rifle Coffee Company. Premium small batch roast-to-order coffee, veteran owned and operated, dark, medium, and light roast available for your flavor preferences. Order now at blackriflecoffee.com. This is not really sponsored by Black Rifle. I would love to be sponsored. If anyone wants to just give me money or can point me in the direction of someone who would do something like that. Okay, so the next order of business is we're going to talk a little bit of tennis because I love tennis, and I know that at least like 2 of the people that are going to listen to this also love tennis. So results from Indian Wells. The Indian Wells tournament just wrapped up. It was a great tournament on the WTA and the ATP side. Really exciting, some good matches, and it was fun to follow, which is something that kind of has been a rarity for tennis tournaments lately in the past, probably say 4 years or so. There's been some really good tournaments here and there, but by and large, it's been a little bit dull. I want to say I'm not having nearly the amount of fun following tennis that I did from, say, 2010 to about 2013 or 14. But Indian Wells was great. The final in particular was a lot of fun. It was Juan Martín del Potro defeating Roger Federer in 3 sets, in 3 tight sets. And it was a kind of a seesaw affair as far as momentum is concerned. And there was the 3rd set tiebreak was a very interesting one to watch because Roger Federer just kind of went away. And you don't see as many, I want to say, mental errors or mental lapses from Federer as you did in this match. Particularly in finals, so it was very interesting to see. But I could not be happier for Juan. He's one of my favorite players, has been one of my favorite players for going on a decade now. And for those of you who are not quite as familiar with the trajectory of his career over the past 6 years or so, he's been in and out of the tour with injuries. First, he had surgery on his right wrist, and then he had surgery on his left wrist, and been kind of plagued on and off just by being absent from the tour and trying to make recoveries and comebacks for years now. And so I think of all the people on tour that have really missed opportunities to capitalize on what a lot of people consider to be a kind of a lack of depth in the field of players, it's been Juan. And it's been pretty consistently shown that when he's healthy and when he's confident and when he's striking the ball well, he can beat the big 4 players, the top 10 players, and belongs right up there in the conversation with them. So really happy to see him get this win. And surprisingly, it was his first Masters 1000 title, which I didn't realize. So it was just kind of a surprising tidbit that I did not know about. So the next tournament coming up is Miami, which holds a special place in my heart because it's one of the few ones I've actually been to personally. The bracket and the draw is interesting looking. It's pretty wide open. Like I said, a lot of the top players are out. There's not a lot of depth at the top of the field right now. You've got Roger Federer as 1, obviously. You've got Marin Cilic as number 2, and you've got Grigor Dimitrov as number 3. And other than that, it's It's kind of rife for a lot of these young guys to step up and start making names for themselves. I mean, a lot of the top players are either out with injury, out due to surgery, just taking a bit of time off of the tour. And then you've got Roger Federer, who he is, in my opinion, the greatest of all time. And I think that most people would not dispute that at this point. But, he's 37 now, going on 37. I mean, he's basically the crypt keeper of tennis. And that's ancient in tennis terms. And he's been on the tour for 20 years with very little time off because he never gets injured because he moves like a cat. So that leads me into my point of who I see as some of the promising, or at least young guys that I like to watch play, that I hope they can step up in the next couple of years and really start making a name for themselves, or kind of perfecting their style, developing their own style, and creating some more interesting matchups than young guys inevitably falling to the old guard. So I'll start off with Alexander de Minaur. He is a 18-year-old Australian kid. He played in a couple of the lead-up tournaments to the Aussie this year, and really, I like his game. I like that he's always moving into the net. I like that he's aggressive, and I would watch several of his matches back to back to back, and every single time would get into the third set, and he'd be down like 2 breaks, and he would change his game. He wouldn't change his demeanor. He wouldn't hang his head. He would keep playing, and he would always come back and win. And he got to the final of, I believe, Sydney, and lost in the final in 3 tight sets. So that was an impressive display, especially from a young kid. And I've seen now that, Leighton Hewitt has hooked up with him and is in his camp, and I think that's phenomenal. You've got a kid that's that young, that's that hungry, and has the mentality of digging in and gritting out tough matches. I think Hewitt's the exact right person to be in his camp, and that's very encouraging to see, because you see a lot of these kids that are touted as the next big thing before they've really accomplished anything, and don't amount to anything because they're too busy thinking they're a great tennis player, or going out and living the lifestyle and not focusing on their game and focusing on winning and focusing on accomplishing what they can accomplish and really capitalizing on their talents. So not to harsh them, because I'm a middling 4-0 tennis player, and I goof around in public courts once every 2 weeks. So de Minaur is one to look out for. Hyun Chung is one who's already made some big runs in some hefty tournaments. He's got the kind of baseline game that I really don't mind watching. I think that there's an overabundance of young guys that are all trying to play the same style, which is basically hit hard from the baseline. And I think that you do need the guys that have the ability to do that, but there has to be more depth to it, and there has to be a variety across the field. One, selfishly, because it's more fun to watch, and then 2, because I think that when you're basically competing for who has the best baseline game, there's going to be one guy at the top, and everyone else is going to fall short, and there's going to be no opportunity for someone to capitalize on the difference in style and how it matches up. And that's the beauty of tennis, I think, is the fact that it's an individual sport, but it's also a sport of matchups. It's not necessarily who hits the ball best or who has the most consistency from the baseline. It's how do you match up against the style of this other player, which is a very interesting and unique aspect of tennis, is that there's such an artistic side of it, if you want to get whimsical, and say that you're looking at not only who is the best player on that day, but who executes the best game plan and whose style capitalizes the most on the day. So all that to say, I enjoy watching Chung play quite a bit, so look forward to seeing more of him in the future. Another young guy that's been around for a little bit longer, but is still young in his career, is Luca Pouille, a young French kid. I really enjoy watching him play. He's had some pretty big matches in the past, particularly against Rafa at the U.S. Open a few years back, and actually beat him. And somebody I think that is really going to start rounding out his game, and as a matter of fact is just now, as of this week, in the top 10, which is exciting to see. So, okay, so we're moving on from tennis. Now we're going into what I'm just going to call it this time nerd stuff. So there's a couple different things in the land of video games that I play. There's a new expansion coming out for Hearthstone. Hearthstone's an online card game, collectible card game, and there's a new expansion coming out called the Witchwood. It should be out within the next month and a half or so. But the big news I want to discuss is Fortnite. Fortnite is a video game that I'm sure a lot of people have heard of. It's in a lot of Instagram memes, and it's just absolutely blowing up in a way that I've not really seen on kind of a social and social media level and popularity. I think everybody that that has an Instagram account or a Facebook account has at least seen clips of Fortnite being played, particularly by a streamer called Ninja. And Ninja's a 26-year-old man who basically just streams the game for a living. He plays it. He's widely regarded as the best, and streams it, and does a lot of really silly things in it because he's just so good that he can goof around and do really entertaining plays that other people wouldn't attempt. He's actually shattering records for Twitch viewership. Twitch.tv is the place where you can see people stream. It's probably the most popular platform in America to watch people stream games, basically play video games, and you can watch them play them as they're streaming. And a lot of times they'll have a picture-in-picture set up to where you could see their face as they're playing. I used to stream StarCraft 2. I'm looking to do that again very soon, just for fun. But Ninja's shattering records. He actually streamed with the rapper Drake the other day. They played together, and they had over 628,000 concurrent viewers, as I recall correctly, which is ridiculous. I believe the previous record was like 380,000, and so shattered that record. And that's massive. 628,000 concurrent viewers is ridiculous. I mean, that'd be great for any network broadcast. But yeah, Drake joined them, and they squatted up, and they played several games. A couple other rappers that I'm not as familiar with, or a couple other artists maybe, they joined them as well, but it was just a massive, massive number. In fact, I saw the other day that on CNBC, they interviewed Ninja. And again, this guy is a 26-year-old man who basically plays video games all day and broadcasts them, and he's got blue hair. He dyes his hair all different colors for whatever reason. But I guess if you're making almost $500,000 a month streaming video games, you can kind of do whatever you want to with your hair. But he was on CNBC basically discussing his stream success and why he thought Fortnite was doing so well, the different aspects of the game that's so appealing to so many people, the reason that there's so many skill caps that allow for a lot of basically no barrier to entry as far as if you just want to come in and play and do the basics, but there is so many different mechanics in the game that allows you to strive to become better and better and better. And it's impossible if you're really good at gun battles, that's good. But if you're also good at building, that's good. But and there's a teamwork aspect to it. Anyway, it's a kind of a weird game. It's an interesting looking game. When I first saw it, I thought it was kind of odd because it was so cartoony looking. But playing it is an absolute blast, and it's the first game I've played in a long time where I've really been excited to kind of just play, fit one more game in there, probably since the days of Halo 3 or maybe Call of Duty Black Ops 2. So that was an interesting interview to see. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is deconstruct a little bit of culture. I was listening the other day to a speech given on the floor of the Virginia House of Delegates by a delegate named Nick Freitas. I believe I'm pronouncing that right. And the topic was gun control. And I'm going to play this clip here in a minute for you. And it's about 7 minutes long, so bear with me. But I really do think it's worthwhile to listen to. So he basically was discussing, as obviously is a hot button issue these days, the issue of gun control. And then he moves into the general level of discourse within our political structure at this time. Kind of it's been prevalent in the two-party system. But I'm going to play this, and then I'm going to discuss it at the end.
So over the last several days, Mr. Speaker, there's been a lot of discussion about an open and honest debate with respect to school shootings, gun violence, gun control, etc. And an open and honest debate, as I understand it, is one that would rely on data, facts, evidence, analysis, reason, logic, etc., etc. And I'm certainly willing to have that debate. I think if we were going to look seriously at school shootings and gun control, we would analyze things like, why do all mass shootings seem to take place in gun-free zones? Wouldn't it be reasonable to test whether or not the efficacy of gun-free zones have actually achieved what their intended intent is? We'd start to look at most of these shooters come from broken homes. What sort of government policies have actually encouraged broken homes? You can look at left-leaning think tanks like the Brookings Institute that will actually say that some of it can be attributed to various cultural changes that happened in the 60s, to include the abortion industry. You can look at more conservative-leaning organizations that will say that the welfare state contributed significantly to dismantling the family as families became more and more dependent upon the government than they were mothers and fathers in the home raising children. We could look at various status with those areas within the United States and around the world that have strict gun control measures and what their crime rates look like, whether it's Chicago, New York City, Washington, D.C., and others that have incredibly strict gun laws, and yet for some reason it hasn't seemed to stop the gun violence in those particular areas. We can look at the analysis out of 538, which is considered more of a left-of-center data analysis think tank, where you had several analysts now confirm through the data that they were looking at, not just in the United States, but in Canada, Great Britain, and Australia, that they were shocked that the data did not support what they thought gun control measures would actually achieve. We can look at the number of cases within the United States where a gun has been used for self-defense. Estimates range everywhere from 100,000 uses to close to 1 million uses within the United States. Now, some organizations and some reporters only want to report on the ones where a gun was used and it actually resulted in the death or maiming of the perpetrator. But if you look at the ones where the gun was used and the mere presence of the firearm actually dissuaded a criminal from committing an act of violence, an act of rape, an act of murder, the number shoots up, it skyrockets. So when people on this side talk about the importance of the Second Amendment, please understand it's not just some base philosophical conviction that we all have. It is rooted in the idea that while we may be a post-Enlightenment society, the vast majority of horrible atrocities that we've seen have happened in those post-Enlightenment societies. Has happened as a result of government systematically disarming citizens and claiming themselves to be the sole responsible party for their security, and then turning on those same citizens and punishing them. That's the most egregious cases. But in the individual cases of self-defense, that's why the people on this side of the aisle hold the Second Amendment in such high esteem, because we honestly believe that you have an inherent right to defend yourself. And your ability to defend yourself should not be excluded to your size. Firearms provide someone that is weaker and not as fast the ability to actually defend themselves from a stronger attacker. Some of the other things that we would look at, and some of the things I would hope we would have bipartisan support for, all of us agree that we need to make sure that our students are better protected when they go to schools. One of the things that we would look at is arming certain teachers. Not every teacher, but a teacher that is comfortable with it, is former law enforcement, is former military, that is now in the classroom. Delegate Plum said yesterday that that was ridiculous to consider. Why? Is it because the other side of this debate will only accept one quote-unquote solution to this problem, and that is tearing apart or gutting the Second Amendment? And I understand, we're going to mention just a couple of the bills that were done this year, right? Background checks, getting rid of bump stocks. If you're wondering the other reason why we can't have an honest debate over this one is because, quite frankly, I don't think any of us on this side of the aisle believe you when you say that's all you want to do. It'll be bump stocks, it'll be background checks, then it'll be different kind of background checks that register the guns. Then after that, it'll be we need to ban assault weapons. What's an assault weapon? Something that looks scary. Then after that, it'll be semi-automatic rifles. After that, it'll be semi-automatic handguns. Then it'll be revolvers, shotguns. Because when the policies fail to produce the results you are promising to your constituents, you'll be back with more reasons on why we've got to infringe on Second Amendment rights. The other reason why it's really difficult to have an honest and open debate about this is because of this, members of this body comparing members on this side of the aisle to Nazis. Members on the other side of the aisle saying that when a 24-year-old teacher gets up and says that the whole debate is between the Second Amendment or her life, that's a false dilemma. And quite frankly, one of the ones that I found the most offensive, along with being compared to Nazis, was being compared to segregationists. I just want to remind everyone someone very quickly. It was not our party that supported slavery, that fought women's suffrage, that rounded up tens of thousands of Asian Americans and put them in concentration camps, that supported Jim Crow, that supported segregation, or supported mass resistance. That wasn't our party. That was the Democrat Party. Now, I'm thrilled that Democrats no longer believe that, and I don't believe that a single current member of this body who is a Democrat ever believe those things, but I would really appreciate it if every time you want to make a powerful point, you don't project the sins, the atrocities, and the injustices that the Democratic Party perpetrated on others onto us. So if we want to have an open and honest debate, I am all for that. Let's do that. But it does start with a certain degree of mutual respect. It starts with a certain degree of not assuming that the only reason why we believe in the Second Amendment is because the NRA paid us off. Well, if that's the sort of logic you want to use, why don't you go take a look at how much money the NRA spends and how much money Planned Parenthood spends? Because when I get up here and I talk about abortion, I don't assume that you're all bought and paid for by Planned Parenthood. I don't assume you're horrible people because I disagree with you on a policy position. I assume you have deep convictions and that we can have an argument and a debate about it. But if you're not willing to reciprocate that level of respect, well, don't be surprised when it becomes more difficult to talk about these things. Because there is a lot that we can do, and there is a lot that we need to do to ensure the security of our children and our citizens. But yes, we are going to have a problem with so-called solutions which infringe on people's liberty under the promise the government will provide for their security. Because ultimately in this last school shooting, we had a perfect example of government being engaged over 30 times and still failing to provide security for those students. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, slow clap for Slick Nick, because that was extremely well said. I mean, I'm going to briefly brush over the first bit, just because I think that the gun control debate has been had ad nauseum, and I don't really want to get into it at this point. But the really powerful portion, I thought, and the thing that needed to be said, needs to be said much more in the public sphere, and the message that needs to be broadcast is the second bit. And look, I have no love for politicians. I do not think that people in the political realm that make a career out of it have the best interest of their constituents at heart. I think that they're in there for self-preservation and the furthering of their career. I think that that's just the position I hold. So I think at the local level, there's a lot of really good people that are trying to make a difference and trying to do the right thing politically. But I think at the higher levels, I don't really think people concern themselves too much with necessarily what the right thing is. I think it's whatever will get votes and whatever the party line needs to be towed is. But I'll say that a reason that I was a big fan of Ronald Reagan is because he was one of the last politicians to say things that I think needed to be said and messages I think needed to be heard. So he would say the federal government is too powerful, there's too much centralized government, there's too much power, it needs to be downsized. He would say things like a governmental entity or a governmental branch, or a governmental department rather, that's created is the closest thing that you'll ever see to eternal life on this earth, because the government never downsizes itself voluntarily. Because, why would they? What's the incentive to? And so the point of all that is that even if he didn't mean it, or even if it was just lip service, at least it was said, and that's a kind of thing that needs to be said. The thing that was broadcast in the second part of the speech is something that needs to be said much more. We've reached a real fever pitch in this country of division, and we've really kind of stumbled into a very dangerous, I think very precarious and dangerous place with the level of discourse that's in this country, because as Mr. Frieda said, there's a big preponderance of people that are starting to basically associate somebody who disagrees with their perspective or disagrees with their particular policy prescriptions with people who are vindictive, malicious, and evil. I think that's a very dangerous thing to do, and I think that that's not a great means of argumentation, because there's a whole litany of ways to disagree, of ways to discuss, refute people's points, have a discussion, even have an argument, what would be considered an argument. And name calling and ad hominem are the two most base and ineffective forms of discourse, and that's really what a lot of modern discourse boils down to. Is it not only do I disagree with you, but I think that you are a bad person, and I think that you have ill intent here. If you come at someone in a discussion like that, the discussion's over. There's no more discussion. There's no more exchange of ideas. There's a wide disparity between you and the person you're having the exchange of ideas with now, because you have indicated to them that you not only do you disagree with them and that you will be able to bounce ideas back and forth, but that you think that there's something evil and malicious behind what they're discussing, and that's just not something that people respond to well, obviously, particularly in the political realm. I mean, it's not worthwhile. This is completely unworthwhile. The level of malice and name calling that has kind of been perpetuated in the political realm. I mean, these people's job is basically to have discussions and craft policy, and they're breaking down to basically saying, but what am I? Nana nana boo boo. You're a poopy butthead. Stuff like that. It's ridiculous that this is where we've reached as a society. Especially in the realm of politics, these people are professional politicians, and they can't get beyond basically the two most base level. I mean, obviously, they're the easiest forms of discourse and shutting down your opponent, but they're also the least effective and the most harmful. On the other side of the spectrum, you've got the theory of, when you're making an argument, to take your opponent's position at its most strongest point and then deconstruct it. So basically, when you're discussing something like gun control, well, let's not say it's gun control, but anything, any point of debate or discussion, you take your opponent's position at its peak, at basically giving them the absolute benefit of the doubt and taking their centralized point, the central value of what they're saying, and explicitly refute that. And if you can't do that, then that's where the discussion comes in. That's where compromise comes in. But if you can take your central point and basically deconstruct that from its strongest perspective with every benefit of the doubt given to it, that's really where your strength is going to come in. You can say, I see your point. I think you have good intentions. I think that your position is something that comes from your experience and from a perspective of care and empathy. But here is why I think it is fundamentally not the best way to go. That's really the best way to go about having a discussion like that. And I think that that's completely lacking in today's culture. I mean, to the point that Mr. Fritos was making, regardless of whether you disagree with the Republican policy, calling someone a Nazi is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Comparing someone to segregationists in this day and age is ridiculous. And again, it's simply a way of shutting down and trying to reach a perceived moral high ground so that you don't even have to have the discussion. And I think that that's not only extremely harmful, but I think it's really continuing to create a rift between the populace. Now, conspiracy theorist or not, you might say that that's what the government wants, but it's working, and it's harmful, because I've had discussions with people that disagree with me, and it's like there's no common ground. It's uncomfortable. It's immediately uncomfortable, which it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. An exchange of ideas between two benevolent people, or two people with decent intentions, should be just that. It shouldn't be immediately bristling. And it's become that way because the divide in the populace and the divide of opinion in the culture has been so widened that you've got people on each side of the aisle basically in their trenches, digging in their heels and feeding off the talking points of their echo chamber, which, listen, you're not going to be doing. That's World War I strategies. You're not going to be pulling anybody else into your trench. You're not going to be having people cross the lines because they're going to get mowed down by machine gun fire. It's just not. It's not worthwhile. It's not worthwhile, and it's not effective. And I think more people basically standing up, as Mr. Fritas did, and saying, "Listen, this is unacceptable. I'm willing to have a discussion, whether you agree with me or not, but we cannot begin the discourse this way, because it's basically kabuki theater. It's nothing. It's not. It's nobody in. I don't believe anybody in the government actually believes that about their counterparts in the opposing party, but it's a way to just shut it down and basically continue to solidify and galvanize their base, and it's the most base form of that, and it's terrible. Again, I think the two-party system in this country is really destroying the ability to exchange ideas without this sort of thing happening, and I think that there needs to be some alternative to it. So, okay, now we're going to transition, because I really wanted to wrap up the show, and I would like to actually make this a habit. So I'd like to wrap up the show with a bit of good news. There is an Instagram page called Tank's Good News. I encourage everybody that has Instagram to go follow it. It's a fellow named, well, his handle on his other page, which I believe is just a meme page, is Tank Sinatra. But he's created this page called Tank's Good News, where he only shares good news, which I think is a phenomenal idea, because I think that there's far more good and bad. The good news is not necessarily as sexy for headlines, and that's why people don't broadcast it as much. But I think it's a lot more worthwhile, and it would lead to a lot less cynicism in the populace if people focus more on the good than the bad. And he shares daily, well, not daily, but at least once a week I've seen him basically share a bit of good news or a story from recent times that was a really positive thing. So something that he shared recently was a story of two dogs that, I believe this was in January, two dogs that begged to be let outside and saved a woman from freezing to death. So I'll read this to you real quick because it's very short. So two Labradoodles are being credited for saving an elderly woman's life. The dogs, Adam and Eva, that's funny, I hadn't read that yet, woke their owners at 4:30 a.m. on Sunday. They strangely tugged on their owner's sleeve, insisting to be let outside. The owners, Lonnie and Susan Chester, told the Jackson Citizen Patriot that they were at first wary of letting them out in the snowy yard of their Norvell Township home, worried something dangerous was alarming the dogs. But finally, the owners relented, sliding open the door. Adam and Eva bolted out, going straight to a woman lying in the snow. The woman, who was in her late 80s, was wearing nothing but a nightgown. She looked up at me and said, "I'm so cold," Lonnie Chester told the Patriot. I have no idea how long she'd been out there. She must have been terrified. The temperature was around 9 degrees at the time. Lonnie Chester brought the woman inside, covered her in blankets, and called police, according to the Associated Press. The woman finally arrived. They had been searching for her, but could not see her in the darkness. It could have been a tragic outcome, but Adam and Eva had Adam and Eva not woken us, Susan Chester said. I don't know how they knew she was out there, but they did. So that's a great story. So that's really cool things, and that is why dogs are better than cats. There is no argument. Okay, so last thing I'm going to do is a suggestion to make the world a better place. This sounds kind of pretentious, but I actually think it's kind of a cool idea, and something that I'm challenging myself to do, rather than just telling other people to do nice things. So this is a concept that I saw recently. I think it's an awesome idea, and whenever I drive around, I try to have a couple bottles of water and some like cracker snacks in my car to give to folks that are panhandling on the streets or at intersections and crosswalks. But this was a step further than I think it was a really neat thing, especially for ladies to do. If you have a purse at your home that you don't want, just fill it with snacks or sanitary and hygiene products and maybe some candy or something like that. Next time you see a homeless woman, give it to her. So now she's got a purse and she's got it filled with goodies and essentials. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up there. The only other thing I have left is, this was going to go into nerd stuff, but I decided to close it because I think it's appropriate, being that it's an outro. So I did some voice work yesterday and recorded my impression of, if anybody's seen Dragon Ball Z, they have a guy with a crazy, deep, grumbly voice that does the intro and the outro, basically saying what is going to happen next on the next episode and all that jazz. So I'm going to play that at the end here, and I'm going to leave that for you. It's supposed to be basically a spoof and a mock on it, so if it's not good, I don't care. Anyway, thank you so much for listening, and please hit me up with any suggestions you have or feedback. I'm looking forward to doing more of these. This was fun, albeit a little bit rough, and I'm speaking fast because it is extremely cold in my room, and I'm trying to go get some wood to make a fire. So I'll talk to everybody later.
On the next episode of Dragon Ball Z, Chi-Chi cooks up a mad stew while things are going on Namek. Will Goku finally release the Spirit Bomb? No he won't. And then we get minutes of action and then back to Chi-Chi in the kitchen. On the next exciting episode of Dragon Ball Z.